Tonight, we are going to spend some time on a lonely stretch of coast, far from the noise and hurry of the modern world. We're going to explore what daily life was really like for an ordinary lighthouse keeper in the 19th century. There is no great drama here, no shocking discoveries. Instead, we will find a quiet rhythm, a life measured by the sun and the tides, and the steady, sweeping beam of light that kept lonely sailors safe. So find a comfortable position. Let your breathing slow, and allow your mind to drift back in time to a solitary stone tower, standing guard against the immense and silent sea. Our journey takes us to the late 1800s, a time when the coastlines of America were still wild and rugged frontiers. Maritime trade was the lifeblood of the nation, and ships filled with cargo and passengers navigated treacherous waters, guided only by the stars and by the lighthouses. These towers were more than just buildings. They were symbols of safety, of steadfastness, beacons of hope in the vast, dark expanse of the ocean. They were often built on remote, windswept islands or desolate, windswept capes, places of profound isolation. And in each of these lonely outposts lived a keeper, a person bound by duty to a relentless yet simple task, to keep the light burning. It was a life of immense responsibility and profound solitude, a life that required a unique kind of person, patient, meticulous, and comfortable with their own company. For months on end, the keeper's only companions might be the circling gulls, the crash of the waves, and the steady, rhythmic pulse of the light they tended. Tonight we will step into the shoes of such a keeper. We'll feel the cold stone of the tower walls, hear the wind whistling through the lantern room, and understand the quiet dedication that this life demanded. We'll explore the daily routines, the simple tools, and the silent thoughts of a person whose work, though unseen by most, touched countless lives out on the dark water. Let the world outside fade away as we begin our lonely watch. The life of a 19th century lighthouse keeper was governed not by a clock on the wall, but by the sun itself. Their day began long before dawn, in the deep, silent darkness of the pre-morning hours. The keeper would rise from a simple bed, often in a small attached dwelling or in quarters at the base of the tower. The air would be cool, carrying the damp, salty scent of the sea. The first task was always the same: the ascent. Imagine the climb. A slow, steady journey up a winding spiral staircase. Each step, often made of cast iron or stone, would echo in the enclosed space. The keeper's hand would slide along a cool metal handrail, worn smooth by countless trips. The only light might be a small lantern carried in their other hand, its gentle flame casting long dancing shadows on the curved walls. Up and up they would go, the sound of the wind growing louder as they neared the top. Reaching the lantern room, the glass-enclosed chamber at the very peak of the tower, was like entering a different world. Here the keeper was suspended between the earth and the sky. Through the massive panes of glass, the world was a canvas of deep indigo and gray, the horizon just beginning to soften with the first hint of morning. And at the center of it all was the great lamp, its light still burning brightly, having kept its vigil through the long night. The keeper's first duty was to extinguish that flame. With practiced care, they would turn down the wick, and the brilliant light that had sliced through the darkness for miles would shrink and then vanish, plunging the lantern room into the gentle gray light of dawn. The air would still be warm from the lamp's long hours of work. For a moment, there would be a profound quiet, the transfer of responsibility from the lamp back to the sun. The night's watch was over, but the keeper's day had only just begun. With the lamp extinguished, the most important task of the day commenced, cleaning the lens. This was not a simple chore like washing a window. The Fresnel lens, a magnificent invention of the time, was the heart of the lighthouse. It was a complex array of glass prisms and rings, meticulously designed to capture and focus every bit of light from the lamp into a single powerful beam. To the keeper, this lens was a precious jewel, and it was treated with the utmost reverence. The cleaning process was a ritual. The keeper would first don soft linen overalls to protect the glass from any oils or dirt on their clothing. They would use a feather brush to gently sweep away any dust or soot that had settled on the prisms overnight. Each section of the lens, every single piece of intricately cut glass, had to be carefully tended to. It was slow, meditative work, requiring a steady hand and complete focus. After dusting, the polishing would begin. The keeper used a special cleaning solution, often a mix of alcohol and water, applied with a soft, lint-free chamois cloth. They would breathe on the glass, creating a fine mist, and then polish it until it shone with a perfect diamond-like brilliance. They were trained to notice the tiniest imperfection, a smudge, a streak, a speck of dust, anything that might diffuse the light and diminish its power. This daily polishing wasn't just about cleanliness. It was about ensuring the safety of unseen sailors. The keeper knew that a poorly maintained lens could reduce the range of the light by miles, a difference that could mean life or death for a ship navigating a storm or a treacherous reef. As they worked, circling the great glass structure, they were not just a custodian, they were a guardian. The silence of the lantern room would be broken only by the soft squeak of the cloth against the glass, and the distant, rhythmic sigh of the ocean below. Once the lens was pristine, the keeper's attention would turn to the lamp itself. Throughout the night, the burning wick would have produced a fine layer of soot. The lamp's chimney had to be cleaned, and the wick trimmed with surgical precision. A poorly trimmed wick would not burn evenly. It could smoke, which would cloud the lens, or flicker, which would alter the lighthouse's specific signal, its unique pattern of flashes that identified it to sailors. The keeper would carefully trim the wick to be perfectly level, ensuring a clean, steady flame. Then, the fuel reservoirs had to be refilled. In the earlier part of the century, this might have been whale oil, a costly and sometimes scarce resource. Later, it was replaced by lard oil, and eventually by the more efficient and reliable kerosene. The keeper would haul the heavy cans of fuel up the long spiral staircase, a physically demanding task. Every drop of fuel was precious. The keeper had to meticulously measure and pour it, ensuring there was enough for the coming night, with a reserve for emergencies. Spills were not only wasteful but also a fire hazard in the confined space of the tower. This task, like all others, was performed with deliberate, unhurried care. There was a rhythm to it all, a routine that brought a sense of order and purpose to the profound isolation. After tending to the lamp and lens, the keeper would draw heavy canvas curtains around the entire glass structure of the lantern room. This was crucial. The magnificent lens, designed to focus light, could just as easily focus the rays of the sun. Without the curtains, the sun's focused heat could crack the precious prisms, or even worse, start a fire. The tower, which was a beacon of safety at night, had to be protected from the dangers of the day. The lantern room would be cast into a cool, dim twilight, a place of rest before its work began again at dusk. With the heart of the lighthouse, the lamp and lens cared for, the keeper's work would expand outwards to the rest of the tower and the dwelling. A lighthouse was a machine, and like any machine, it required constant maintenance. The clockwork mechanism, which rotated the lens to create the lighthouse's unique flashing characteristic, was a marvel of 19th century engineering. It consisted of a complex series of gears and weights, not unlike a giant grandfather clock. Every day the keeper had to wind this mechanism. This often involved cranking a handle to raise a heavy weight that, as it slowly descended over many hours, would power the rotation of the lens assembly. The keeper would inspect the gears, oiling them with a fine-tipped dispenser to ensure their movement was smooth and silent. They would listen for any unusual sounds, a slight grind, a subtle click, anything that might signal a future problem. Then there was the brass. Lighthouse interiors were filled with brass fittings, railings, vents, gauges, and parts of the lamp assembly. In the salt-laden air, brass would quickly tarnish and corrode. A significant part of the keeper's day was spent polishing this brass until it gleamed. This wasn't just for appearance. It was a matter of pride, but also of preservation. Polished brass was protected brass. The relentless, patient work of polishing was a constant battle against the corrosive power of the sea. The tower itself demanded attention. The keeper would inspect the stone or brickwork for cracks, patching them with mortar. The ironwork of the lantern room and railings would need to be painted frequently to ward off rust. The windows of the tower and the keeper's quarters had to be washed clean of the salt spray that constantly misted them. It was a never-ending cycle of cleaning, polishing, painting, and repairing. A quiet, solitary war against decay. The keeper's responsibilities were not confined to the tower alone. They were also the sole inhabitant of a small, self-sufficient homestead. Survival depended on foresight and hard work. Most lighthouse stations had a small patch of land where the keeper could cultivate a garden. This was a vital source of fresh food in such an isolated location. The keeper would tend to rows of hardy vegetables, potatoes, carrots, cabbages, things that could withstand the wind and salty air. Tending the garden was a welcome change from the cold stone and metal of the tower. It was a chance to work with the soil, to feel the sun on one's back, and to nurture life in a place that could often feel barren. The sight of green shoots pushing through the earth was a small, quiet joy, a reminder of growth and persistence. The keeper might also raise a few chickens for eggs or perhaps a goat for milk if the station was large enough. The sea itself was also a source of sustenance. The keeper would often spend part of the day fishing from the rocks or a small skiff, casting a line into the churning water below the tower. The catch would provide a welcome addition to the diet, a fresh meal to supplement the stored provisions of flour, salt pork, and dried beans. This act of fishing was another part of the daily rhythm, a direct and peaceful interaction with the powerful environment that surrounded them. All of these tasks, gardening, tending to animals, fishing, were woven into the fabric of the day. They provided not only food but also a sense of connection to the land and the seasons. They were a counterbalance to the mechanical, precise work inside the tower. It was a life of dualities, the intricate man-made world of the lens and clockwork, and the raw natural world of the sea, the soil, and the sky. A crucial and often overlooked part of the keeper's daily routine was the logbook. The United States Lighthouse Board, the government body that managed the nation's lighthouses, required every keeper to maintain a detailed daily log. This was not a personal diary, but an official record of the station's operation. And yet, for many keepers, it became something more. Each entry would begin with the date and the state of the weather. The keeper would note the direction and strength of the wind, the condition of the sea, the presence of fog or rain. They would record the time the lamp was lit and the time it was extinguished. They would meticulously list the amount of oil consumed during the night and the maintenance tasks performed during the day. A lens polished, a mechanism wound, a shipment of supplies received. They would also record any unusual events. A ship passing too close to shore, the sighting of a vessel in distress, the migration of birds that might have collided with the lantern glass. These logs were sent to the Lighthouse Board for review, a way for the centralized authority to monitor its vast and scattered network of lights. They were a testament to the keeper's diligence and a crucial source of data for maritime safety. But in the profound silence of the station, writing in the logbook could become a ritual of reflection. The careful, deliberate script, the neat columns, the formal language, all brought a sense of order to the day. For a person who might not speak to another human for weeks at a time, the act of writing, of putting observations and actions into words, was a way to affirm their own existence, their own purpose. The logbook became a silent confidant, a record not just of the weather, but of a life dedicated to the light. The concept of time for a lighthouse keeper was different from that of someone in a bustling town. It was fluid, measured in seasons and tides rather than hours and minutes. The day was structured by tasks, yes, but the overall pace was slow and deliberate. There was no need to rush. In fact, rushing could lead to mistakes, and in a lighthouse, a mistake could have dire consequences. So the keeper moved with a practiced, unhurried grace. After the morning's core duties were complete, the lens, the lamp, the clockwork, the afternoon might stretch out with a quiet sense of openness. This was the time for those other, less urgent tasks. Mending a fishing net, for instance. The keeper would sit on a wooden stool outside the dwelling, the scent of salt in the air, and patiently work with a needle and twine, repairing any holes. It was repetitive, tactile work that allowed the mind to wander. Or perhaps they would turn their attention to the station's small library. The Lighthouse Board often supplied its stations with a portable library, a wooden chest filled with books that could be rotated among different lighthouses. For the isolated keeper, these books were a precious link to the outside world, a window into other lives and other places. They read history, science, poetry, and classic novels. The act of reading, in the quiet of the afternoon, was an essential nourishment for a mind that craved stimulation beyond the endless horizon. There was also correspondence. The arrival of the supply boat, perhaps only once a month or even once a season, was a major event. It brought not only fuel and food, but also letters from family and friends. A letter would be read and reread many times, its words savored. The keeper would then spend hours composing a reply, carefully choosing their words to convey their experiences, their thoughts, and their affection across the miles of water. The act of writing a letter was a deliberate, heartfelt effort to bridge the distance. As the afternoon sun began to dip towards the western horizon, the keeper's focus would slowly shift back towards the tower. The day's cycle was coming full circle. The preparations for the night watch would begin. It started with another trip up the winding staircase, this time to remove the heavy canvas curtains that had protected the lens from the sun. As the curtains were pulled back, the lantern room would once again fill with the soft golden light of late afternoon. The keeper would perform one final inspection of the lens and the lamp. They would check the wick again, ensure the fuel reservoir was full, and give the prisms a final gentle wipe with a soft cloth. Every detail had to be perfect. There was no room for complacency. The lives of sailors depended on this moment, on this ritual. The keeper would then wind the clockwork mechanism one last time, ensuring it had enough power to turn the lens throughout the long night ahead. They would stand for a moment in the quiet lantern room, watching the sun sink lower, painting the sky in hues of orange, pink, and purple. It was a sight of incredible beauty, a private spectacle performed just for them, day after day. Then at the precise moment of sunset, the keeper would strike a match. The small flame would touch the trimmed wick, and with a soft whoosh, the lamp would ignite. A small, simple flame at first, which the keeper would carefully adjust, increasing its size and intensity until it burned with a brilliant, white-hot incandescence. The night's watch had officially begun. The great light was alive once more. With the lamp lit, the keeper's work was transformed. They were no longer a custodian or a maintenance worker. They were a watchman. The great lens, now illuminated from within, began its slow, majestic rotation. A powerful beam of light would sweep out from the tower, cutting a silent, brilliant path across the darkening water. It moved with a steady, hypnotic rhythm, a pulse of light against the growing darkness. The keeper would remain in the lantern room for a while, observing the light's operation. They would watch its beam slice through the twilight, making sure its rotation was smooth and its characteristic. The specific pattern of flashes and eclipses was correct. They might look out towards the horizon, searching for the faint lights of distant ships, knowing that on their bridges, sailors were looking back, searching for this very light. It was a moment of profound, unspoken connection. On a clear night, the keeper might stay at the top of the tower for hours, simply watching. The sky above would be a black velvet cloth, scattered with the brilliant diamond dust of countless stars, unobscured by the lights of any city. The Milky Way would stretch across the heavens in a luminous band. The only sounds would be the whisper of the wind, the distant murmur of the waves, and the faint, rhythmic ticking of the clockwork mechanism behind them. This was the reward for the long day's labor. It was a time of peace, of solitude, and of deep, quiet satisfaction. The keeper was the master of this small, orderly universe. A solitary guardian standing between the chaos of the sea and the safety of the shore. Their work was done in isolation, but its purpose was fundamentally social. It was about protecting others, about serving the unseen community of mariners who depended on their unwavering vigilance. Not all nights were clear and peaceful. The keeper's true test came when the weather turned. A storm approaching a lighthouse was an awesome and humbling spectacle. The keeper would see it building on the horizon for hours, the sky darkening from gray to a bruised purple-black, the sea growing agitated, its surface churned into a chaos of whitecaps. The wind would begin to moan, then howl, rattling the thick glass panes of the lantern room. During a storm, the keeper's vigilance was more critical than ever. The light had to remain burning, its beam piercing through the driving rain or swirling snow. The keeper might have to stay in the lantern room all night, constantly monitoring the lamp. A strong gust of wind could find its way through a vent and threaten to extinguish the flame. The rotating mechanism might struggle against the force of the gale. The tower, which felt so solid and immovable on a calm day, would seem to come alive in a storm. The keeper would feel the vibrations as massive waves crashed against its base, sending tremors up through the stone. The sound would be deafening, a constant roaring thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the world. Rain or sleet would lash against the glass, and the keeper would have to go outside onto the narrow catwalk, high above the raging sea, to clear ice or snow from the panes so the light could shine through. This was not a life for the faint of heart. It required a deep well of inner calm, an ability to function under immense pressure while surrounded by the raw, violent power of nature. And yet, keepers often wrote of these moments not with terror but with a kind of awe. They were witnessing nature at its most powerful, from a position of relative safety, all while performing their sacred duty. The storm would eventually pass and the quiet rhythm of life would return, but the memory of its fury and their own steadfastness would remain. Let's take a closer look at the marvel at the center of the keeper's world, the Fresnel lens. Invented by the French physicist Augustin Jean Fresnel in the 1820s, it was a revolution in optical technology. Before Fresnel, lighthouses used simple mirrors to reflect light, which was incredibly inefficient. Most of the light from the lamp was wasted, scattered in all directions. The Fresnel lens changed everything. Imagine a giant beehive or a crystalline barrel constructed entirely of glass. It wasn't a single piece of glass, but an assembly of hundreds, sometimes thousands of hand-ground prisms. The central section consisted of magnifying lenses, while the sections above and below were made of catadioptric prisms, a special type of prism that uses both refraction and total internal reflection. It's a complex idea, but the result was beautifully simple. Every single prism was angled with mathematical precision to capture light that would otherwise be lost. Light going up, down or sideways, and bend it, reflecting it into a single concentrated horizontal beam. The efficiency was astonishing. A Fresnel lens could project the light of a simple oil lamp for 20 miles or more. They were often called the invention that saved 1,000,000 ships. These lenses were categorized by orders, from the massive first-order lenses used in major coastal lighthouses, which could be over 12 feet tall, down to the small sixth-order lenses used in harbor lights. To the keeper, the lens was a living thing, a delicate and powerful entity. Cleaning it, as we've heard, was a daily sacrament. They understood, perhaps better than anyone, that this intricate web of glass was the very soul of the tower. The life of a keeper was, by its very nature, solitary. But not all keepers were entirely alone. Many were married, and their families lived with them at the station. For a keeper's spouse and children, life was also one of profound isolation, but it was a shared experience. The dwelling, whether it was a small cottage connected to the tower or a separate house, became a home in the truest sense of the word, a sanctuary against the wilderness outside. The presence of a family softened the edges of the keeper's lonely existence. The spouse, often the wife, would take on the immense responsibility of running the household under difficult conditions. This included cooking on a wood or coal stove, washing clothes by hand, and educating the children, as there were no nearby schools. She was, in essence, an assistant keeper, though often without the official title or pay. Children growing up at a lighthouse station had a unique and wild childhood. Their playground was the rocky shoreline, their companions the seabirds. They learned the rhythms of the tide and the names of the constellations. They understood the importance of their parents' work from a young age. Many would help with chores, polishing the brass or tending the garden. It was a life that fostered a deep sense of responsibility and a powerful connection to the natural world. However, the presence of a family also brought its own anxieties. Sickness or injury was a constant worry. The nearest doctor could be a day's journey away by boat, and only if the weather permitted. The keeper had to be a jack of all trades, a medic, a teacher, a carpenter, responsible not only for the light but for the well-being of their entire family in a remote and often unforgiving environment. The quiet joys of family life were always balanced by this heavy weight of responsibility. The supply tender's arrival was the most significant break in the year's monotony. This sturdy boat, run by the Lighthouse Board, was the station's umbilical cord to civilization. Its schedule was infrequent and often unreliable, subject to the whims of weather and sea conditions. The keeper might expect it in July, but a long summer storm could delay its arrival until August. The days leading up to its expected arrival were filled with a quiet, hopeful anticipation. When its silhouette was finally spotted on the horizon, it was a moment of profound relief and excitement. The tender brought the essentials for survival: casks of kerosene or lard oil, sacks of flour and sugar, barrels of salted meat, and crates of canned goods. It also brought mail, the precious letters from loved ones, and perhaps a new box of library books to refresh the station's small collection. The process of unloading supplies was an all-hands-on-deck affair. The tender would anchor as close to the station as was safe, and a smaller boat, a dory, would be used to ferry the goods ashore. This was often dangerous work, navigating rough surf to land on a rocky beach or a small pier. The keeper and his family, if they were present, would work tirelessly to help unload and secure the provisions. The crew of the supply boat brought not just goods, but human contact. For a few hours, the keeper could converse with other people, catch up on news from the mainland, and break the long spell of silence. The visit also brought the lighthouse inspector, an official who would meticulously examine the station from top to bottom. He would check the cleanliness of the lens, the state of the paintwork, the accuracy of the logbook. A good inspection report was a source of immense pride for a keeper. A bad one could be a cause for dismissal. Then, as quickly as it came, the tender would depart, leaving the station once again to its solitude, but now restocked and reconnected, ready for another season of vigilance. We often think of lighthouse keeping as a male profession, and for the most part it was. But the history of America's lighthouses is also illuminated by the stories of remarkable women who tended the lights. These female keepers were pioneers, taking on a role that was physically demanding, isolating, and far outside the conventional expectations for women in the 19th century. Sometimes a woman became a keeper after the death or disability of her husband. She already knew the routines, the demands of the job, and the soul of the tower. Rather than see the light extinguished, she would petition the lighthouse board to take over the post officially. Women like Abby Burgess, who as a teenager in Maine, kept the lights burning for weeks through a vicious winter storm while her father was stranded on the mainland, became legends. Another of the most famous was Ida Lewis of the Lime Rock Light in Newport, Rhode Island. Over her 39 years as keeper, she was credited with saving at least 18 lives from the turbulent waters around her station. She was a skilled and powerful rower, often heading out into storms in her small boat to rescue sailors from capsized vessels. She became a national hero, celebrated for her bravery and strength. These women performed the same duties as their male counterparts. They climbed the long stairs, hauled the heavy fuel, cleaned the massive lenses, and stood watch through terrifying storms. They faced the same profound isolation and immense responsibility. Their stories are a quiet but powerful thread in the larger tapestry of this history, a testament to a resilience and dedication that knew no gender. They were not just keepers of the light, they were beacons of possibility. Let us return for a moment to the inner world of the keeper. What did they think about during the long, silent hours? With the day's chores done and the light sweeping its steady rhythm across the sea, the mind had little to distract it. It was a life that forced introspection. Keepers became keen observers, not just of the weather and the waves, but of their own thoughts and feelings. Some might have found the silence to be a kind of peace, a liberation from the pointless chatter and complexity of society. In the solitude, they could feel a deeper connection to the universe, to the fundamental forces of nature. The rhythmic crash of waves, the cry of a gull, the steady turning of the clockwork. These sounds became a kind of meditation, a natural mantra that could soothe the soul. They would notice the small things, the way the light changed on the water's surface throughout the day, the specific shade of green in a patch of lichen on a rock, the pattern of a spider's web in the corner of a window. In the absence of grand events, these tiny details took on a profound significance. The world, in its simplicity, became more vivid, more real. But the solitude could also be a heavy burden. The silence could become deafening, the loneliness a palpable presence. The mind, left to its own devices, could turn inwards in less healthy ways, dwelling on worries or regrets. The same environment that one day felt like a peaceful sanctuary could, on another, feel like a prison. The keeper's most enduring challenge was not battling storms or maintaining machinery, but managing the vast, uncharted territory of their own mind. It required a unique and resilient form of mental fortitude. The technology of the lighthouse, which seemed so advanced in the 19th century, was in a constant state of slow evolution. The keeper had to be an adaptable mechanic, learning to work with new systems as they were introduced. The most significant change during this era was the fuel source for the lamp. In the early to mid-1800s, the primary fuel was sperm whale oil. It burned cleanly and brightly, but it was incredibly expensive, and its supply was dependent on the success and brutality of the whaling industry. As whale populations declined, the Lighthouse Board sought alternatives. For a time, they experimented with colza oil, pressed from rapeseed, but it was difficult to procure in America. The next major fuel was lard oil. It was cheaper than whale oil and readily available from the vast pig farms of the American Midwest. However, it had a major drawback. In cold weather, it would congeal, clogging the fuel lines and extinguishing the lamp. Keepers at northern stations had to devise small heating systems to keep the oil in a liquid state during the freezing winter nights, adding another layer of complexity to their duties. The final and most important innovation of the era was kerosene. Introduced in the latter part of the century, kerosene was cheap, abundant, and burned with a brilliant, reliable flame. The transition to kerosene lamps made the keeper's job slightly easier and the lights more dependable. Each of these changes required the keeper to learn new procedures, to understand the quirks of a new system, and to adapt their meticulous routines. They were not just operators, they were lifelong students of the practical science of illumination. The relationship between a lighthouse keeper and the sea was complex and deeply personal. The ocean was their constant companion, their provider, and their potential adversary. It was the first thing they saw in the morning and the last thing they heard at night. They came to know its many moods with an intimacy that a land dweller could never comprehend. They learned to read the water's surface like a book. They could tell by the color of the sea, the shape of the swells, and the sound of the surf if a storm was coming, long before the sky showed any sign. They knew the locations of hidden reefs and dangerous shoals, not from a chart, but from watching the way the water broke over them day after day. The sea provided sustenance in the form of fish and sometimes lobster or crab. But it also constantly tried to reclaim the land on which the tower stood. The keeper's battle with rust and decay was, in essence, a battle with the sea itself, with the corrosive salt that was carried on every breeze and in every wave's spray. And yet, despite its dangers, there was a profound beauty that the keeper witnessed daily. The sight of the moon creating a shimmering path of silver across a calm sea. The playful dance of dolphins in the waves. The awe-inspiring spectacle of a whale breaching in the distance. The sea was not an enemy to be conquered, but a vast and powerful presence to be respected, understood, and lived alongside. This deep, abiding respect was at the very core of the keeper's identity. The lighthouse keeper was an employee of the federal government, and their life was structured by the strict rules and regulations of the U.S. Lighthouse Board. In 1852, the administration of lighthouses was reformed and placed under this board, a body of distinguished military officers and civilian scientists. They brought a new level of order, efficiency, and uniformity to the service. The board issued a thick book of instructions to every keeper, detailing their duties with military precision. The book specified everything, from the exact method for polishing a lens to the proper way to fill out a logbook entry. There were rules about personal conduct, cleanliness of the station, and the prohibition of alcohol. The keeper's life was their own, yet it was also completely governed by this distant authority. The system was hierarchical. Keepers reported to district inspectors who reported to the board. A principal keeper might have one or two assistants at a larger station, and they were expected to maintain a formal professional relationship. This rigid structure was designed to ensure that every lighthouse in the nation was maintained to the same highest standard. Reliability was paramount. For the keeper, this meant that while they were physically isolated, they were also part of a large, disciplined organization. Their solitary work was connected to a national mission. They were the frontline soldiers in a quiet, constant war against the darkness and the dangers of the sea. This sense of being part of a larger purpose, of serving a greater good, was a powerful antidote to the loneliness. It gave their meticulous, repetitive tasks a meaning that transcended the simple act of polishing brass or trimming a wick. As the night wore on, after the checks were complete and the light was turning as it should, the keeper might settle into a chair in the watch room, just below the lantern. This small, circular room often had windows looking out in all directions. It was a place to sit, to watch, and to wait. The night watch was not always an active duty, but a state of being, a state of readiness. The keeper would listen. They learned to distinguish the normal sounds of the tower, the ticking of the clockwork, the sigh of the wind, from any sound that was out of place. A new rattle, a sudden groan from the structure. These were things that required investigation, even in the dead of night. They would watch the beam of light on its journey. On a night with low clouds or fog, they could see the beam itself, a solid-looking cone of light, rotating slowly through the mist. It was a tangible presence. They would also watch the sea, looking for the lights of ships. They might see the paired red and green navigation lights of a steamer, or the single white light of a sailing vessel. Seeing those lights, knowing they were on course and safe, was a quiet affirmation of the keeper's work. And sometimes they would simply sit and think. They would think of their family, asleep in the dwelling below. They would think of the world on the mainland, a world that was growing and changing in ways they could only read about in old newspapers. They would think about the countless nameless sailors out on the water, whose faces they would never see, but whose lives were, in a small way, in their hands. It was in these quiet hours of the night watch that the true weight and the true meaning of their life's work would settle in. The end of the 19th century marked the beginning of the end for this way of life. New technologies were on the horizon that would slowly render the solitary keeper obsolete. The first major change was the automation of the light itself. The invention of the sun valve in the early 20th century, for example, could automatically extinguish a lamp at dawn and relight it at dusk, sensing the ambient light. Clockwork mechanisms were gradually replaced with more reliable electric motors. The lamps themselves evolved from burning oil to using incandescent electric bulbs, which were far more powerful and required much less daily maintenance. The need for a keeper to be in constant physical attendance began to diminish. One by one, stations that were once manned around the clock were automated. The keeper's dwelling would fall silent. The daily rituals of cleaning the lens, polishing the brass, and winding the clockwork would cease. The towers still stood, and their light still shone. But the human heart of the station was gone. The lights were now controlled by switches and timers, monitored from a central location miles away. For the keepers, this transition was bittersweet. It represented progress, a safer and more efficient system, but it also marked the end of a unique and proud tradition, a way of life that had defined them. The last keepers to turn over their keys to an automated system in the 20th century were closing a chapter not just in their own lives, but in the history of the American coast. The era of the lonely watch was drawing to a close. But before we leave this era behind, let's reflect on the legacy these keepers left. It is not a legacy written in grand monuments or famous battles. It is a legacy of quiet, steadfast service. It is found in the ships that made it safely to harbor, in the cargo that was delivered, and in the families that were not lost to the sea. It is a legacy of countless anonymous acts of diligence. The lighthouse itself remains a powerful symbol. Even today, in our world of GPS and advanced navigation, these old towers captivate our imagination. They speak to us of a time when the world felt larger and the forces of nature more immediate. They represent resilience, a lonely strength against the storm. When we look at a lighthouse, we are seeing more than just a tower. We are seeing the embodiment of the keeper's spirit. We can imagine the long climb up the spiral stairs, the patient polishing of the lens, the quiet satisfaction of watching the beam sweep across the dark water. The tower is a monument to their vigilance, a silent tribute to the men and women who dedicated their lives to keeping the light. Theirs was a simple creed: the light must not fail. Through storms, sickness, loneliness, and monotony, they held to that creed. It was a promise made to the unseen and the unknown, a promise kept night after night, year after year. It is a story not of adventure, but of profound and unwavering responsibility. And in that there is a deep and enduring beauty. So let us imagine one last evening at the station. The sun has set, leaving a final deep crimson scar on the horizon. The sea has softened to a dark, gentle swell. The air is cool and clean. Inside the lantern room, the great lamp is burning with a fierce, steady brilliance. The lens rotates in its slow, silent dance, gathering that brilliance and sending it out into the gathering dark. The beam sweeps across the water, a reassuring pulse of light. It illuminates a passing wave, revealing its lacy white crest for a brief moment before plunging it back into darkness. It touches the distant shore, glinting for a second on the windows of a faraway farmhouse. and then it sweeps out again, over the vast empty expanse of the open ocean, a guide for the traveler, a warning of the coast. Down below, in the keeper's dwelling, a warm light glows from a window. The day's work is done. A simple meal has been eaten. The logbook has been filled out. There is a quiet sense of order, of peace. The keeper is at rest, but their work continues. The light, their proxy, stands watch for them. The sound of the tower is a gentle hum. The rhythmic ticking of the mechanism, the soft whisper of the flame, and underneath it all, the endless soothing murmur of the sea. It is a lullaby of machinery and nature, a sound of safety and solitude. It is the sound of the lonely watch. It is the sound that will carry us, gently, toward our own rest. As we prepare to leave this quiet shore, let the rhythm of the light stay with you. The slow, steady sweep, the moment of brightness followed by a gentle return to darkness. In and out, like a slow, deep breath. Let the sounds of the station be a comfort. The distant wash of the waves, the steady ticking of a clock, the profound and peaceful silence of a world at rest. There is nothing more to do here. The keeper is vigilant, the light is burning, the sea is calm, all is well. The ships are safe on their course, and you are safe in this moment of quiet. Allow the story to fade, like the light from a distant star. Allow the details to soften and blur. There is only the feeling of peace, of security, and of a gentle, persistent rhythm. Let your mind drift on that rhythm. Let go of the day. Let go of your thoughts. There is only the darkness punctuated by a soft, sweeping light. There is only the gentle sound of the sea. Rest now. The watch is kept. Sleep now.
you.